Captain Marcus Reed adjusted his midnight blue Earth Defense Force uniform one final time before stepping through the airlock of the alien vessel. At 34, he had seen enough combat zones to know when he was walking into hostile territory, and the sleek corridors of the Altarian flagship Starfall definitely qualified. The walls seemed to pulse with bioluminescent veins of light, casting an ethereal blue glow that made everything feel otherworldly. Captain Reed announced a tall, slender being with elongated limbs and silver skin that shimmered like liquid mercury. "I am Navigation Officer Joran. Commander Vex awaits you on the command deck." Marcus nodded, his brown eyes scanning the alien architecture around him. 3 months ago, humanity had been alone in the galaxy. Now they were junior partners in the Galactic Coalition, assigned to serve alongside species they barely understood. His assignment as cultural liaison aboard the Starfall was supposed to be a diplomatic victory. So far, it felt more like exile. The elevator ride to the command deck was conducted in uncomfortable silence. Marcus caught glimpses of crew members, through transparent sections beings with crystalline exoskeletons. Others that seemed to be made of living energy, and a few whose anatomy defied his understanding entirely. All of them studied him with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. "First time working with Altarians?" Joran asked, his voice carrying musical undertones that seemed to resonate in the walls themselves. "First time working with anyone non-human?" Marcus admitted. "Commander Vex is particular about protocol. She has little patience for human unpredictability." The elevator doors whispered open, revealing the command deck of the Starfall. It was nothing like the cramped bridge of an Earth vessel. Instead, it resembled a vast amphitheater with holographic displays floating in three-dimensional space around individual crew stations. And at the center of it all stood Commander Zara Vex. Marcus had studied her file extensively, but nothing had prepared him for the reality. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, her skin a deep indigo blue that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. Her hair was white as starlight, pulled back in an intricate braid that fell to her waist, interwoven with small crystals that chimed softly when she moved. But it was her eyes that captured his attention, solid silver orbs without visible pupils. Yet somehow he could feel her gaze tracking his every movement. Her uniform was form-fitting and practical, a deep purple material that seemed to shift and flow like liquid while maintaining its shape. Geometric patterns were etched into the fabric, glowing softly with the same bioluminescence as the ship's walls. "Captain Reed," she said, her voice carrying the same musical quality as Joran's, but with an undertone of cold authority. "Welcome. Aboard the Starfall. I trust your quarters are adequate." "More than adequate, Commander. Thank you." She turned back to the holographic displays without acknowledging his response. "You will observe our operations for the next rotation. Do not interfere. Do not offer suggestions. Your species has been spacefaring for barely a century. We have explored the void for over 3 millennia. Several bridge officers Altarian made soft chiming sounds that Marcus suspected was laughter. He felt heat rise in his cheeks, but maintained his composure. "Understood, Commander. See that? It is." She gestured to a raised platform at the edge of the command deck. "Your observation post? You will find all necessary data feeds have been configured for human visual perception." As Marcus took his designated position, he noticed the subtle shift in the crew's behavior. Conversations became more fluid, movements more graceful. Commander Vex herself seemed to relax incrementally, her rigid posture softening just enough to be noticeable. For the next 4 hours, he watched them work with a precision that bordered on artistic. They responded to threats and navigational challenges with a harmony that his own species could barely achieve after months of training together. And through it all, Commander Vex orchestrated their movements with quiet confidence, never raising her voice, never showing frustration. It was only when a priority message came through from Coalition Command that Marcus saw her mask slip. Silver eyes flickered toward him for just an instant, and in that moment, he glimpsed something unexpected. Not the cold disdain he'd expected. It's not even professional tolerance. Fear. The stench of death hung heavy in the recycled air of Colony Station Omega-7, Lieutenant Nistras adjusted her medical scanner with practiced efficiency. Her green eyes focused on the readings that spelled doom for another settlement. The plague had swept through the outer colonies like wildfire, and now it threatened to spread to the core worlds. 23 more casualties in Sector 4, she reported into her cum unit, pushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. 28. She had seen enough suffering to last several lifetimes. But the systematic devastation of entire populations never got easier. Acknowledged came the gravelly response from her unlikely mission partner. I am securing the western perimeter. General Kane Thorne of the Draconic Hegemony was everything the intelligence briefings had warned her about and worse. Standing. Nearly 7 feet tall, his reptilian features were sharp and predatory, with scales that shifted from deep emerald to black, depending on the light. His eyes were golden and vertical slitted, capable of tracking movement with unnerving precision. Most unsettling were the scars that crisscrossed his hide, telling stories of battles fought and won through sheer brutality. Another Drac Butcher, the other human medics had whispered when their joint task force was announced. They probably caused this plague themselves. Jenna had heard the stories about the draconic involvement in the border wars, where entire human settlements had been reduced to ash. But she had also read General Thorne's actual military record, stripped of propaganda. The truth was more complex than hatred wanted to admit. A soft chime from her medical tricorder drew her attention back to the present. The bio readings were unlike anything in the Coalition database. It wasn't a natural plague. It was engineered, designed to target specific genetic markers, while leaving others untouched. General Thorne, she called over the comm. I need you to see this. She found him in the colony's main plaza, standing over the body of what had once been a Regelian merchant. His massive clawed hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined the corpse, those predatory eyes, studying wounds with clinical precision. Your findings, Lieutenant Cross? His voice carried a slight hiss, an artifact of his physiology that many humans found intimidating. This plague isn't random. Look at these readings. She held up her scanner, displaying the genetic breakdown. It's targeting specific DNA sequences. Someone designed this as a weapon. General Thorne's golden eyes narrowed to thin slits. Show me the progression patterns. For the next 2 hours, they worked side by side, analyzing samples and mapping the plague's spread. Despite his fearsome appearance, Thorne proved to be remarkably knowledgeable about xenobiology. His questions were precise, his observations insightful. You studied medicine, Jenna realized, watching him identify cellular breakdown patterns that had escaped her notice. Before I became a soldier, he confirmed, not looking up from the microscope. The hegemony required all military officers. To understand biology, know your enemy's weaknesses. Is that what humans are to you? The enemy? His massive head turned toward her, those alien eyes studying her face. Your species fascinates me, Lieutenant Cross. So much compassion for those you barely know, yet so much hatred for those who could be allies. Hard to see you as an ally when your people glassed 3 of our colonies. And hard for me to see humans as trustworthy when they sold weapons to our enemies while negotiating peace treaties. His voice carried no anger, just weariness. Perhaps that is why we are here together. To learn whether cooperation is possible. An alarm suddenly pierced the air. Jenna's scanner screamed warnings as new readings flooded the display. The plague, she gasped. It's mutating, becoming airborne. General Thorne was already moving, his scarred hands flying over a communication panel. All teams, emergency. Evacuation protocol. Seal environmental suits immediately. Wait, Jenna caught his arm, surprised by the warmth radiating through his scales. The mutation pattern, I think I can synthesize a temporary immunity booster. But I need 20 minutes. The atmospheric processors will fail in 15. Their eyes met across the growing chaos of alarms and emergency lights. It's in that moment. Jenna saw past the predatory features to something unexpected: honor, duty, and perhaps even compassion.
Act.
Then we work fast, she said. Together, he agreed. And for the first time she heard something almost like hope in that alien voice. The next 18 minutes became a blur of desperate chemistry and improvised medicine. While General Thorne coordinated the evacuation and held the failing atmospheric systems together through sheer determination, Jenna synthesized compounds that had never been tested on living subjects. Their survival in the survival of 300 colonists depended on theories becoming reality in the face of impossible odds. When the immunity boosters finally worked, when the last transport lifted off, carrying grateful survivors, Jenna found herself standing beside the towering draconic general as they watched the colony station fade into the distance. Your people will remember this day, she said quietly. As will yours, he replied, and she noticed his voice had lost its threatening edge entirely. Perhaps that is enough to begin building something new. The crystal spires of New Avalon stretched toward the twin suns like frozen lightning, their faceted surfaces casting rainbow patterns across the diplomatic quarter. Ambassador Elena Torres stood at the panoramic window of the negotiation chamber, watching hover transports weave between the towers with practiced grace. At 31, she had brokered peace between warring corporations and mediated territorial disputes across a dozen systems. But nothing had prepared her for this assignment. Crystalline sovereignty and the Void Collective had been locked. In a resource war for over 2 decades, their conflict threatened to destabilize the entire sector, and Coalition Command had given her exactly 72 hours to broker a ceasefire before military intervention became necessary. Ambassador Torres announced, a voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Prince Dexorian has arrived. Elena turned to face her aide, slender being whose translucent skin revealed flowing patterns of bioluminescent energy beneath. Thank you, Console Viren. Please escort him in. The doors to the negotiation chamber whispered open, and Prince Dexorian entered with the fluid grace of his kind. Standing nearly 6.5 feet tall, his body appeared to be carved from living diamond, refracting light into spectacular prismatic displays with every movement. His features were sharp and angular, almost geometric in their precision, with eyes like faceted sapphires that seemed to capture and hold light within their depths. Ambassador, he said, his voice carrying harmonic overtones that seemed to resonate in the crystal walls themselves. I trust the accommodations meet your organic requirements. Elena had dealt with condescending diplomats before, but something in his tone suggested this was more than simple arrogance. They're adequate, Your Highness. Shall we proceed with the preliminary discussions? By all means. He settled into his chair with liquid grace, the crystal of his body chiming softly against the furniture. Though I suspect your coalition has already chosen sides in this conflict, the coalition remains neutral. Our only interest is preventing further escalation. Prince Dex's sapphire eyes glittered with what might have been amusement. How refreshingly naive. Your species has been spacefaring for what, barely 2 centuries? Yet you presume to mediate between civilizations that have existed since your world was still cooling from its formation? Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice level. Perhaps that gives us perspective you lack. We see the war's cost in lives rather than ancient grievances. Ancient grievances? The harmonic quality of his voice shifted, becoming discordant. The Void Collective murdered 17 billion of my people in a single day. They weaponized our own star, Ambassador Torres. 17 billion souls reduced to cosmic dust because we refused to surrender our sovereignty. The raw pain in his voice caught Elena off guard. She had read the intelligence reports, but hearing it from someone who had lived through it was different. I didn't realize you were there during the stellar collapse. I was Crown Prince of the Zephyr system. I watched my home star die, taking 8 worlds with it. His crystalline features seemed too dim, light flowing inward rather than radiating outward. I was one of 300 survivors from 17 billion inhabitants. Elena set down her datapad, suddenly understanding why this negotiation had claimed so many predecessors. Your Highness, I don't. He held up a hand that caught the light like a prism. Don't offer me your human pity. I have heard it before. From your predecessors. Empty words from a species that has never faced true extinction. You're right, Elena said quietly. Humans have never faced systematic genocide on that scale. But that doesn't mean we can't understand loss, or that we can't help you find a path forward. Forward. Prince Dex laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. There's no forward, Ambassador. There is only ensuring the Void Collective pays for their crimes, and how many more billions die in that pursuit? For a moment, his sapphire eyes met hers across the negotiation table. Alina saw something there beyond rage and grief exhaustion, perhaps or the weight of responsibility for his surviving people. The preliminary casualty reports from the latest engagement, she continued, sliding a data crystal across the table. 40,000 collective dead, 31,000 sovereignty losses, all in the space of 6 hours. Prince Dex's crystalline fingers closed around the data crystal, and Alina noticed they trembled slightly. War has a price. So does peace. What do you know of peace? His voice was sharp as broken glass. Your coalition brokers truces between trading partners and territorial skirmishes. This is a war of survival. Lena leaned forward, meeting his alien gaze directly. Then let's talk about survival. Not just for your people, but for everyone caught in this conflict, including the innocents on both sides who never chose this war. Something flickered in those faceted eyes, doubt, perhaps, or a desperate hope. He didn't dare acknowledge. Chamber fell silent, except for the soft harmonic resonance of the crystal walls. And in that silence, Alina saw the moment when Prince Dex Orion began to believe that perhaps, against all odds, peace might be possible. After all, over the following days, their negotiations evolved from bitter accusations to genuine dialogue. Lena discovered that beneath the crystalline prince's arrogance lay a brilliant strategic mind tormented by survivor's guilt. Lena Dex began to see that the young human ambassador possessed not naive optimism, but the kind of courage required to hope for peace even when surrounded by the wreckage of war. When the ceasefire was finally signed, witnessed by representatives from both the sovereignty and the collective, Lena found herself standing beside Prince Dex on the observation deck, watching the first joint patrol ships launch into the star-filled void. This is only the beginning, she said softly. Yes. He replied, his voice carrying new harmonics she had learned indicated deep emotional resonance among his people. But perhaps that is enough. The recruitment center on Station Prometheus buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of species queued for assessment. Sergeant Tyler Nash stood apart from the crowds, his hands clasped behind his back in parade rest position, watching the organized chaos with professional interest. At 29, he carried himself with the rigid discipline of career military. But the haunted look in his dark eyes told a different story. The Kepler incident had cost him everything: his rank, his unit, his faith in the chain of command. Now he was here, volunteering for the Void Stalkers, an elite strike force that recruited from the dregs and outcasts of coalition military forces. It was his last chance at redemption. Sergeant Nash? The voice came from directly behind him. Though he hadn't heard footsteps, he turned to find himself facing something that shouldn't have been possible. Captain Vera Ashanti appeared to be a woman in her early 30s, with dark skin and short-cropped black hair. But there was something subtly wrong about her. The way shadows seemed to cling to her uniform, how her footsteps made no sound, the way she seemed to fade slightly at the edges when he wasn't looking directly at her. "Captain," he replied, offering a crisp salute. "Walk with me." She moved toward a corridor marked with restricted access warnings, and Tyler noticed that security scanners didn't seem to register her presence. "Your service record makes for interesting reading, Sergeant. Exemplary performance for 8 years. Then the Kepler incident." Tyler's jaw tightened. "I followed orders, ma'am. You followed illegal orders? There's a difference." She led him into a briefing room that shouldn't have existed. The corridor had been too short to accommodate a space this large. "The Void Stalkers don't recruit Boy Scouts, Sergeant. We need soldiers who understand that sometimes the mission requires difficult choices. So with respect, Captain, you weren't at Kepler." Captain Ashanti turned to face him, and for a moment, Tyler could have sworn her features shifted slightly, becoming sharper, more predatory. "No, but I was at Shadowfall and Nexus Station, and a dozen other places where good soldiers made hard choices to protect people who will never know their names." She gestured to a chair, but Tyler remained standing. The Void Stalkers operate in the spaces between official military actions. We handle threats that can't be solved through conventional warfare or diplomacy. Our last mission had a 93% casualty rate, and you survived. I always survive. There was something cold in her voice, something that made the shadows in the room seem deeper. Question is whether you can adapt to our methods. Humans have a reputation for being inflexible. Tyler felt familiar anger rise in his chest. Inflexible. We've been fighting alongside coalition forces for 3 years. Fighting, yes, but following. Taking orders from non-human commanders? Trusting your life to beings whose psychology you don't understand? Captain Ashanti moved closer, and Tyler noticed her footsteps still made no sound. At Kepler, you chose to follow human command rather than alien oversight. That decision cost 200 civilian lives. The evacuation protocol was compromised by your refusal to trust Altarian tactical assessment. Her voice was soft but cutting. Your human commander told you one thing. The Altarian tactical officer told you another. You chose based on species loyalty rather than tactical merit. Tyler's hands clenched into fists. That's not, isn't it? She was close enough now that he could see his reflection in her dark eyes. But somehow her reflection seemed to waver. The Void Stalkers are commanded by a Voidborn. We have no homeworld, no species loyalty, no cultural blind spots. We exist in the dark between the stars, and we serve the greater good rather than tribal instincts. What are you? The question slipped out before Tyler could stop himself. Captain Ashanti smiled, and for just an instant her features seemed to shift, again becoming something not quite human, not quite alien, but something caught between states of being. I am what happens when someone spends too long in the spaces between reality. Sergeant Nash. The question is whether you can learn to navigate those spaces without losing yourself. She moved to the window where stars wheeled in patterns that didn't match any stellar cartography Tyler knew. Your next assignment, should you choose to accept it, involves infiltrating a research facility on the edge of draconic space. The target has been experimenting with weapons that could destabilize the quantum foundations of space-time itself. Tyler studied her profile against the impossible star field. What's the catch? The facility is run by humans. Former coalition. Scientists who believe humanity should dominate the galaxy rather than share it. She turned back to him, and her eyes seemed to hold depths that went far beyond physical space. You'll be working alongside former enemies, trusting non-human intelligence, and potentially fighting against your own species. Still interested in redemption, Sergeant? Tyler looked into those impossible eyes and saw something that surprised him, not the cold calculation he expected, but genuine concern. This strange, shadow-wreathed woman was offering him more than just another mission. A chance to become something better than what he had been. When do we leave? He asked. Captain Ashanti's smile was like starlight breaking through clouds. Welcome to the Void Stalkers, Sergeant Nash. Try not to lose yourself in the dark. The mission that followed would test everything Tyler thought he knew about loyalty, duty, and sacrifice. Working alongside beings he had been trained to see as enemies. Following the guidance of a commander who existed partially outside normal reality, he learned that redemption required more than just following orders, required choosing to trust, even when trust seemed impossible. By the time they returned from the quantum research facility, having prevented a weapon that could have torn holes in reality itself, Tyler Nash had become something new. Not just a soldier, but a guardian of the spaces between worlds, ready to face whatever emerged from the darkness between stars. The emergency session of the Coalition Council convened in the crystal chambers of New Avalon. But the usual diplomatic protocols had been abandoned. Representatives from dozens of species filled the amphitheater, their voices creating a cacophony of fear and outrage as holographic displays showed the latest intelligence reports. Captain Marcus Reed stood with Commander Zara Vex near the Altarian delegation, both wearing dress uniforms that couldn't quite hide the intimacy that had developed between them over months of shared missions. The silver patterns in Zara's eyes had grown brighter in recent weeks, a sign that Altarians displayed when forming deep emotional bonds. The hegemony delegation hasn't arrived, Marcus observed quietly. General Thorne and Lieutenant Cross are inbound, Zara replied, her musical voice carrying undertones of worry. Their transport was delayed, extracting civilians from the Kepler system. Across the chamber, Ambassador Elena Torres sat beside Prince Dexorian, their successful peace negotiations having evolved into something deeper. The crystalline prince's body had developed new facets in recent months. Crystalline patterns that Elena had learned were how his people expressed trust and affection. The Voidstalker's report is classified, Elena murmured to Dex, reviewing her datapad. But Captain, Ashanti's team discovered something that has High Command terrified. The massive doors of the chamber suddenly opened, admitting General Kane Thorne and Lieutenant Jenna Cross. The Draconic General's scarred hide showed new markings. A scarification that Jenna had learned indicated a warrior's bond with a trusted battle companion. Their partnership during the plague crisis had evolved into something unprecedented between their species. The session will come to order, announced Chancellor Vrex, his crystalline form chiming with authority. We face an existential threat to all civilized species. The central holographic display activated, showing a region of space that seemed to twist and writhe like a living thing. Stars disappeared and reappeared, planets shifted in their orbits, and the very fabric of space-time appeared to be unraveling. Presenting the report, Captain Vera Ashanti of the Voidstalkers. Captain Ashanti materialized at the center of the chamber, literally materialized, stepping out of shadows that shouldn't have existed. Sergeant Tyler Nash stood beside her, his posture rigid with the discipline of someone who had found purpose again. The entity calls itself the Entropy Chorus, Ashanti reported, her voice carrying clearly despite its soft tone. It appears to be a collective consciousness that exists in the quantum foam between dimensions. For eons, it has been watching our universe, waiting for civilizations to develop technology sophisticated enough to threaten the barriers between realities. General Thorne's golden eyes narrowed. The plague on Omega-7 was a test, correct? As were the stellar manipulations that destroyed the Zephyr system, the quantum experiments at Kepler, and dozens of other incidents we attributed to warfare or natural disasters. Captain Ashanti gestured, and the display showed a timeline connecting seemingly unrelated catastrophes. The Entropy Chorus has been probing our defenses, learning our capabilities. Commander Zaravek stepped forward, her silver eyes reflecting the holographic display. What does it want? To prevent what it sees as an inevitable outcome. Tyler Nash spoke for the first time, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what they faced. According to the data we recovered, every sufficiently advanced civilization eventually develops technology that can damage the quantum foundations of reality. The Chorus believes the only solution is extinction-complete sterilization of all intelligent life before we can pose a threat to the multiverse itself. A shocked silence fell over the chamber. Representatives from dozens of species stared at the display, showing their shared doom approaching from the void between stars. How long do we have? Prince Dex asked quietly. The main assault fleet will arrive in approximately 6 standard months, Captain Ashanti replied. But advanced scouts are already here, infiltrating our societies, turning us against each other to weaken our defenses. Elena Torres stood, her diplomatic training helping her find her voice despite the terror in her chest. What are our options? Unity, Lieutenant Cross said simply. The Chorus succeeds by exploiting our division species against species, ideology against ideology. They're counting on us destroying ourselves before they arrive. General Thorne's scarred head nodded slowly. The hegemony pledges its full military might to this alliance. The sovereignty stands with our coalition partners, Prince Dex added, his crystalline form blazing with inner light. Commander Vex's hand found Marcus's, their fingers intertwining in full view of the assembly. The Altarian fleet will fight beside our human allies. One by one, species that had been enemies for centuries declared their unity against the threat from beyond the stars. Ancient grudges were set aside, territorial disputes forgotten. As the reality of their situation became clear, they would stand together or fall separately. The bonds we have forged, Elena said, looking around the chamber at the unlikely partnerships that had brought them to this moment, prove that connection transcends any barrier. If we can learn to trust across species lines, we can face anything that emerges from the dark. As the assembly dissolved into urgent planning sessions, the four pairs who had started this journey found themselves together in a quiet antechamber. Marcus and Zara, their hands still entwined. Jenna and Kane, the human medics, small frame dwarfed by the massive draconic general. Elena and Dex, the diplomat and the crystal prince, whose negotiations had become something deeper. Tyler and Vera, the soldier and his enigmatic commander who existed between realities. 6 months, Tyler said quietly. To prepare for a war unlike any we've ever fought, Jenna added. Against an enemy that views our very existence as a threat to the universe itself. Dex's crystalline voice chimed with harmonics of determination. But we won't face it alone, Marcus said, squeezing Zara's hand. Captain Ashanti, who had been silent, stepped forward from the shadows. The chorus made one critical error in their calculations. They assumed that sentient species would always choose division over unity, fear over trust. They've never encountered civilizations that learned to love across the void between worlds. As they looked out through the crystal walls at the star-filled sky, each of them understood that the coming war would test more than their military might. It would test whether the connections they had forged in darkness were strong enough to hold. Against the entropy that sought to unmake everything they had built, but for the first time since the crisis began, they felt something the entropy chorus hadn't counted on: hope.